Good afternoon. We're here for a joint committee of the Planning, Housing, and Parks and the Economic Development Committee. I'm here with my co-chair, Natali Fani-González. We have the Planning Department with us, as well as council staff and the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. Before we dive into a really important conversation about one of Montgomery County's biggest strengths, our biohealth and life sciences industry, and how we can double down on those strengths and the opportunities that we have before us. I wanted to turn it over to co-chair to see if she has anything. Sounds like she doesn't. So why don't we dive right in? I think several of us, I'm sure, have plenty of questions, but I think we can dive right into the presentation and take our questions from there. So with that, why don't I turn it over to council staff and you can walk us through the packet.
Thank you. Good morning, council members and members of the committee. We're here to receive an in-depth and technical study on the real estate needs of life sciences development, with the goal of understanding how to grow and promote the industry from a development perspective specifically, which is obviously an area that the county can influence. The study, which is conducted by ECON Solutions from Philadelphia, has some big ideas, some actionable recommendations, and if there are any ideas or strategies that appeal to you, you can investigate them further. So without much further ado, I'll turn it over to planning staff to give a little more of an introduction.
Yeah, hi. So for the record, I'm Ben Kraft. I'm a research planner with Montgomery County Planning. And so in our research department, in conjunction with our mid-county team, really led this study, or led the management of this study. And so I just wanted to give a very brief background for why we did it, what the motivations were. And so really it was motivated mainly by the Great Seneca Plan, which is currently underway, and I have representatives here working on that from the planning department, and so they can answer any questions related to that. But we wanted, for the Great Seneca Plan, we really wanted to think about transitioning the areas in there, especially the Life Sciences Center, from what it is kind of like a fairly low density, single use office campus type of area into something more diverse, more mixed use, higher density, more of like a 24/7 type of living and working area, and also especially with the goal of really increasing the housing, the infill housing that could go in there. So what we really just wanted to know at both the general and very specific, even site level, about what are the considerations when you're developing life science real estate that we have to know to create this kind of place. So that was really the main question that we wanted to get out of this study. We wanted to see what other places around the country were doing also in this space, because a lot of people are really making this transition also. So So that's really kind of the guiding motivation. As you'll see, I think the study, the consultants really went above and beyond, and there's just a wealth of information about life sciences in general also in the study, which can be helpful. So, and then one last thing is that just about how kind of we worked with the consultant here. In research, we do a lot of work in-house, a lot of research work and a lot of studies like this. Sometimes, especially for a very large project like this, we can contract out with consultants to do it, especially for something like this, not only because of its scope, it was so large, but also because we really wanted an outside perspective. We wanted to hear from some people who are very knowledgeable about the life sciences industry on a national and even global level, and get their perspective. So that's really one of the reasons why we've done this study in this way. And finally, we want this was specifically done in the context of the Great Seneca Plan, because that's kind of what we're working on now. It's our primary private life science hub in the county, but we do intend and envision that the things that are found in the study can be applicable all throughout the county to any of our life sciences districts. So with that, I think I will turn it over to our consultants, Brian Licari and Gina Lavery, who are waiting here virtually from Philadelphia, I believe, from ECON Solutions.
Ben, for the introduction, and thank you, members of council, for having us this morning. I'm Gina Lavery. I'm a senior vice president at eConsult Solutions, and I'm joined today by Brian Licari, as Ben just mentioned. Looking forward to talking through with you our some of our key findings today. And well, I'll just say, next slide, I guess, to progress it along. Just really briefly, an agenda for what we'll be discussing this morning. We'll go through a little bit more of the context that Ben and Bilal already really set very well for our presentation this morning. We'll talk through some of the key findings from our report, which include an overview of the life science market, the supply and demand drivers inherent in this type of industry, land use and development, focusing on the intersection with housing. The case studies and best practices that we'll discuss really focus on the best way to integrate those uses. And then we'll talk through some strategic recommendations. Because this is a virtual or hybrid meeting, I'll suggest that we take questions at the end. We'll try to be able to, go back to slides as needed if you have questions. But I think that's probably the best use or the best approach for this morning. Next slide. So just who we are and the purpose of this report. We're eConsult Solutions. For those of you who are not familiar, we're a Philadelphia-based economics consulting firm. We work at the intersection of public policy and economics. We're about 40 people in size, along with a number of senior advisors. I lead our economic development practice, which focuses on economic development strategies, policy analysis, market studies, and impact studies. A little bit more about our experience is on the next slide. Specific to innovation in life sciences, our expertise ranges from completing market studies and looking at comparative metrics, economic impact analyses. That's really one of our bread and butter activities. We do that throughout the U.S. Competitiveness research and strategies, especially looking at where different localities or states stack up in terms of incentives, tax policy, et cetera. We've worked with developers as well as state and local government on these issues, especially at the intersection of innovation, life sciences. So I think that Ben did a better job than I can on setting the context for why we're here this morning. The impetus for this report was really in service of the Great Seneca Plan update, but it's really meant to serve as a document that is instructive and helpful for the county as a whole, thinking about land use and real estate for life sciences in the future. It's not targeted primarily at the Great Seneca Science Corridor. But a few things that we just to hone in on the scope of what we looked at over the course of the last several months. First was understanding the current landscape of the life sciences economy. That means the supply and demand factors for the industry, and especially what's driving real estate decisions, whether that's for businesses that are local to Montgomery County or those that are considering moving to the county or to the region overall. We call that inbound demand. We also look to evaluate how life sciences integrates and intersects with housing. And that's really important when we get into talking about having a place that's vibrant 24 hours a day, that has been referred to. And then lastly, we have a set of recommendations that are really meant to help inform the county overall, as well as the Great Seneca Science Corridor's plan that is currently underway. So just to set the stage, this is we did do an initial dive into understanding the county's past planning efforts regarding the Great Seneca Plan. Looking back over the last several decades, and then in 2021 there was an amendment followed by what's currently an update that is underway. Just to orient you around how we are thinking about the strategic recommendations in this plan, our primary focus was on land use, but naturally life sciences requires a couple of pieces for kind of a successful ecosystem, and that includes economic development efforts, whether that's incentives or programs or policies, placemaking efforts, as well as workforce, and considering not only educational attainment, but also the workforce training initiatives and entrepreneurial programs that a place implements. So those are kind of the the three areas, and there's obviously intersections of those in terms of how we've thought about these recommendations for this analysis. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to Brian, who will get into the meat of some of our life science market overview.
Thanks, Gina. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about the life sciences industry as a whole and some key metrics nationally and locally, and then talk about some of these land use implications. So just to sort of ground us in the conversation, when we're talking about life sciences, it's pretty encompassing, where we're covering the industry includes biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, veterinary, botanical science, environmental science, and so it is quite broad. And each region that has a life sciences cluster has these sort of subclusters that they specialize in. But essentially, it's this broad stroke of activities that have to do with plants, animals, and living organisms. Next slide. So when we think about the real estate needed to support this industry, there's really three different typologies to consider. We typically think of life sciences aligned with research and development, R&D space. So that's your very highly specialized lab space. But there's also the office component, so the administrative needs as part of the research and development. And then there's also manufacturing. So if we think about medical device manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturing, that's a much larger footprint in terms of building needs. It's important to know that all three of these typologies can sort of be in individual buildings. They can be integrated into a single building. They can be integrated into a single campus. And so there's different ways to think about this. Next slide. And so, really, why are we focusing on national or life sciences? The national trends, the industry has been growing nationally, has been quite resilient through the pandemic, growing faster than the national rate of job growth over the last decade. The labor force is almost 2 million nationally, and that's larger than other, large sectors like legal, some engineering sectors. The life sciences sector is larger. Wages are very high, so from an economic development perspective, it's a key sector given the wage growth and wage potential. As I mentioned, over COVID, during the pandemic, there was this building boom in life sciences. A lot of that can be attributed to sort of the shift in investment in real estate from conventional office into life sciences. And so a lot of investment portfolios have been diversifying, which has led to this sort of boom in new construction with nearly 32 million square feet of space to be delivered over the next 2 years. And also contributing to this is the increase in venture capital investment. So that's direct investment to startups in the life sciences space. Next slide. So when we think about the ecosystem, what makes life sciences unique is its research and innovation aspects. Unlike conventional sectors like finance, you have a lot more of this research infrastructure that is needed coming out of institutions of higher learning, from federal research institutes. There is a much stronger focus on human capital, thinking about attracting, retaining, developing a skilled workforce. There's the innovation output. So the research is then sort of, created via patents, clinical trials, and then tech commercialization. So when the economic development, the job growth, the investment, the private investment, it's really through tech commercialization. That is also facilitated through venture capital investment. And then kind of this last piece is thinking about value proposition, competitiveness, quality of life. If I am a talented entrepreneur, why am I choosing a particular place? And so there's these other elements that are considered. Next slide. So again, as we mentioned, the study, is focused on the life sciences center, but it's really a countywide approach. I mean, one of the reasons why we have the focus on the life sciences centers, just given the concentration in private sector life sciences employment. So that's sort of this hub, but there are opportunities, and as we'll show with some of the case studies and other sort of real estate trends that we see, life sciences can happen in a lot of places. And so then, where does Montgomery County stand? What are these opportunities? I think we all know that, the life sciences sector is very strong in the county. It's a growing industry nationally. It's got an established workforce that's very attractive to new employers. There's this great talent pipeline from higher ed, but also from all of the federal research activities that are occurring. On a sort of a real estate perspective, lease rates for life sciences space is very competitive. So when you think about other competitive markets like Boston, Philadelphia, San Francisco, the lease rates are very competitive. So that's very attractive to someone who's searching for space nationally. We worked with Colliers with this report. They had data on tenants that are seeking life sciences space. And so over 1 million square feet of space is being sort of explored by life sciences companies in the county. So that's a big opportunity. And then with very low vacancy rates, it indicates there's some opportunity for expanding supply. And so some of the challenges, I'll give a little more detail on the costs. I mean, effectively, one of the biggest barriers to expanding life sciences is the cost of development. It's very complicated. There's a more unique set of developers that can actually deliver this. It's high risk given the costs. The county has not seen a ton of new development. There's a lot of development in the pipeline, but there's been sort of this modest increase since 2010. We did talk to some developers as part of this, effort, and talked a lot about sort of spec space. So that's space that you build and you're confident that you can find tenants to lease it up. The spec market is not as strong in Montgomery County as opposed to, let's say, a Boston. And so that just means that there needs to be more of the linkages between the end user and the developer. And so those partnerships need to happen at the front end of the real estate or front end of the development process, as opposed to building a building and then finding tenants to lease it up. Again, competition, other competitive markets, and I'll show, talk a little bit about, activities in Raleigh and Philadelphia and Boston that are sort of, key competition for the county. And then finally, with startup demand, again, with that entrepreneurial ecosystem, having that diversity of spaces for different types of businesses is critical, where you have the established employers, and then you've got some incubators and startup space, but, where is that in-between step-up space? And that's going to be critical for expanding the industry. Next slide. And so just to kind of give the order of magnitude with development costs. So, when we interviewed life sciences developers and sort of at a high level took a look at some of the costs to deliver the space, the R&D space, given the specifications of plumbing, exhaust requirements, biosafety, we're looking at $1,000 to $2,000 per square foot compared to conventional office that is significantly lower than that. So again, this is that sort of added risk of delivering this type of product. Next slide. And then, so for the land use considerations, go on to the next slide. We sort of looked at Montgomery County really through the lens of a site selector. So when a site selector is evaluating a place, they're working with a client. What are these important elements that they're looking for specific to life sciences companies? Some of the conventional site selection criteria for really any industry, looking at transportation and site availability and housing. It's, life sciences is somewhat unique because the land use policies are key. Human capital, how, levels of educational attainment and sort of pipeline for talent. That institutional ecosystem is critical for life sciences as well, and in addition to physical infrastructure. So you go to the next slide. So we took a look at Montgomery County and sort of did this evaluation, and I won't get into all the details now. All this is in our report, but I think at a high level, the transportation infrastructure is very strong. But from a site availability perspective, I think there's sort of a need to sort of hone in on specific sites and opportunities for developers specific to life sciences. Our report really focused on land use policies where there's a need for greater flexibility for building mixed use and higher density development in the life sciences space. And then with the institutional ecosystem, again, strong federal presence, there's a strong healthcare presence. There's the lack of that larger scale institution of higher learning. But as we've learned from our case studies, which we'll present, that presence does not necessarily have to be physical. It's more about these connections and partnerships. So we'll talk about, the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, where their anchor institutions, University of North Carolina, NC State, those campuses are 15 miles away from Research Triangle Park, yet they're still active in that space. So there are opportunities for those regional partnerships. Next slide. So, we went into detail in the report on each of these different typologies. So when we're thinking about life sciences development, what are some different possibilities and what are we seeing in other competitive markets? There's sort of examples of you already have life sciences space built, and there's infill housing and other mixed use development built around it. And that was the case in the University City in Philadelphia. Mixed use infill development. So these are sort of smaller scale parcels in more urban areas where you see this sort of integration of life sciences buildings, conventional office, residential with open space and plazas and other placement-making elements. There's vertical mixed use, which we're now seeing, and so this has really changed the way we can think about life sciences, where historically life sciences uses were separated from residential mixed use, other commercial centers, but now we're starting to see in sort of these larger markets in Boston and Philadelphia, this vertical where you have life sciences space within the same building as residential uses. We're not saying this is necessarily the direction for Montgomery County, but just to show that it's a possibility, and that really, if the market conditions are strong, this is what we're seeing in other markets. There's master plan mixed use districts, and so these are sort of larger in scale, where you have either existing life sciences uses, but also you have in many cases a master developer that is sort of building out to a larger plan. There's master plan greenfield development, which is this example was in Holly Springs, North Carolina, where it's greenfield but next to residential neighborhoods, and also incorporating sort of a mix of uses as part of that master plan. So even in these sort of lower density sort of suburban designs, we're still seeing this integration of other uses. And then finally, with the mixed use redevelopment, we found an example in Durham where it's a vacant, obsolete strip shopping center that's being redeveloped into a mixed-use life sciences center. So there's this opportunity for, again, sort of that identification of potentially obsolete commercial parcels and redeveloping into this mixed-use typology. And so, implications for Montgomery County. There's a lot of information on this, but effectively, it's the county is very well positioned to grow. There is this need to sort of make these stronger connections with institutions regionally, and I think that it's really this shift to a mixed use typology, and it's only a recent phenomenon. So again, historically, and this is in North Carolina and Philadelphia, in Silicon Valley, the thought was life sciences needed to be separated, but we're now seeing more and more of these examples of in order to stay competitive, to sort of have the type of space that's attractive to a talented workforce and to investors, that this mix of uses is needed. And to that, it's really those market conditions that drive it. It's less of a land use consideration. And so really creating as many opportunities to sort of deliver this sort of this mix of uses is critical. And then, I think that final piece of just thinking about there's sort of individual developments but then thinking about sort of a specialized district that sort of integrates all of these different uses that is also critical, where I think there's sort of standalone development that we're seeing, but also that need to have that sort of hub of innovation and entrepreneurial activity that sort of reverberates outward. Next slide, and I'll hand it back over to Gina to talk about case studies.
Thanks, Brian. So as he was alluding to, a lot of the as you're thinking about how to advance life sciences in the county and that integration of uses, part of what that looks like in a lot of places is an innovation district. So this is by no means a new concept. I'm sure that many of you have heard about this before, and possibly even read this Rise of Innovation Districts. So because it's been around for a little bit at this point, but the principles for an innovation district are important for. We've seen it as important for a life sciences ecosystem to grow, and these are principles that are useful across the life sciences nodes across the county, not just in one particular place. But I will note that the one key piece of the innovation district concept is an agglomeration or concentration of activity in certain places. So where we have seen in the past the kind of research park model being a distribution of kind of activities throughout a place, what we have seen in the last decade is the concentration of innovative uses and housing and amenities all in a concentrated place really help kind of develop that ecosystem in a nice and complementary way. The other piece that I'll mention that's important about innovation districts, what we've seen, especially since the pandemic, is that it's I don't want to say pandemic proof, but in a place where in a world where we've all figured out how to do meetings virtually or hybrid, the one thing that has not been kind of able to be put in totally virtually is science and being at a bench and being in a laboratory. What we've seen in across the U.S. is workers who are in those industries came back to their workplace sooner. They needed to kind of be in person for part of their job, and what that means is those supplementary businesses, the retail around those places also saw the benefits of having workers and foot traffic in those communities more sooner than in other downtowns. So just a little bit about the case studies that we looked at. Happy to kind of chat further about any of these as we get into the question and answer session. We've done work in most of these places and have kind of thought about how they apply, and in some cases don't necessarily apply to Montgomery County. But these are a starting point for our comparative research, which we took into two streams. The one being around the organizational structures related to innovation districts. The next slide, please. And then also the land use considerations that go into an innovation district. So what we mean by that is with an organizational district, some sort of entity that is advancing the mission of and for lack of a better term, marketing and promoting the area as a life sciences or innovation district. And then the other set of kind of case studies that we looked at are around land use implications. We didn't dive into all each category for both, because in some cases, for example, University City District, the organizational structure was really interesting and instructive, but being in a very dense urban setting, the land use considerations didn't necessarily apply to Montgomery County. So that's why we've looked at a number of case studies and in different kind of contexts. So we'll talk through a couple of key lessons learned in three overarching buckets. The one is around organizational structure, the second land use and development, and the third, while this is not entirely in the scope of what we were doing with Montgomery planning, just as crucial that the intersection of land use and place and supporting an entrepreneurial ecosystem is just as crucial for the county to be considering in its innovation district planning efforts. So around organizational structure and governance, a few lessons learned and considerations for the county. The one is reliance on anchor institutions is often a key here to developing a robust innovation district or ecosystem. In the case of a place like University City District, it was really founded by a number of anchor institutions. They, said we need to do something to promote clean and green in West Philadelphia, and put in the funds to start the organization, which then was able to, grow from there and fundraise and kind of create and advance as an organization. But it really started with a couple of key institutions. Obviously, Montgomery County doesn't have same types of anchor institutions as are in West Philadelphia. There are a number of hyperlocal and anchored within the place research universities. But what we have also learned in our research and experience is that anchors can be drawn to a place. So in the case of the Research Triangle, the universities have all kind of coalesced in an area to grow an innovation district and all for the purpose of creating this ecosystem. The other lesson learned is it really takes intention in making the market and thinking about how to grow your ecosystem by concentrating your resources in focused areas. And the last piece is don't discount the importance of private sector investment in emphasizing a place in developing an innovation district or hub of some sort. The case studies that we looked at here are at Texas Medical Center, and while not researched as much, the King of Prussia Business District in suburban Philadelphia is also another good example of this. No anchor institutions, but a lot of really large private sector firms, real estate developers that coalesced and said we need to kind of invest our resources to create a place that is attractive to businesses as well as residents. Moving on to the next set of lessons learned for the county from our case studies. The first is around how to incorporate housing, placemaking, and retail amenities. One of the success stories that we saw over and over again was where you have a set of developers that have, or owners of property that have a long-term invested interest in making in place. So in the case of Wexford Science and Technology is one developer we've worked with across the US. What we see there is that they have really thought about, okay, we know we need, green space, and we need the housing, and we need retail, and we know that that maybe at first the one aspect of that might be a loss leader for us, but we know that we're creating an intentional place that's going to be attractive to folks in the long term. It's not a 5-year real estate play. It's a 20, 30-year play for them. Master planning of sites is also crucial. Getting the zoning aligned to what the county wants. And then going to RFP is crucial. That's what we've seen in the Navy Yard in Philadelphia. For the first time in, 50 years, there's going to be a very robust set of multifamily residential properties and developed in the Navy Yard. Along with that, a series of amenities, hotels, retail, hospitality, creating a really robust and vibrant new place in South Philadelphia. Pretty remarkable. The only reason that they're able to do that is getting the zoning and permitting and having that all streamlined for the developer that was coming in from the RFP process. And then the last lesson learned here is still remaining to be flexible and knowing that life sciences, cell and gene therapy, that's all, that is the kind of topic of, but knowing that, it's the innovation is evolving, and in another 20 years, there's probably going to be another type of set of land use requirements or needs from development as it relates to any kind of new technology and commerce that develops out of it. And the last lesson learned around innovation and entrepreneurship, just a quick note, you guys have Montgomery County has a really strong set of and robust history of life sciences and pharmaceuticals. The one area that we've noted through our research that is an area for an improvement is that kind of full lifespan of businesses that are early incubation through midstream and then those graduating to being more mature experience firms. You have a lot of the mature experience companies, and they're obviously successful and a big successful piece of the county's life sciences story. But thinking about how to position the county in a way that supports businesses of all sizes will just help the industry grow and be an attractive place for a broader set of workforce as well. So something like investing in entrepreneurial programs such as the Cambridge Innovation Center is a model that we've seen. Those types of investments are useful in driving innovation and new innovation in places nationally.
Right. So I'll walk through the strategic recommendations. And so I think we've sort of talked through a lot of these already. Of what are those land use challenges in Montgomery County? Thinking about sort of infill mixed use development and establishing a zoning that can be supportive of it. Thinking about sort of these other sort of placemaking elements. Thinking about connectivity. Building at a pedestrian scale. Thinking about aligning resources. And sort of creating a place that's more inviting and conducive for new private investment. So you go to the next slide. So we presented this earlier, kind of walk through it, but again, sort of our primary set of recommendations is really on the land use side and assisting Montgomery planning with the tools that they need to sort of facilitate new life sciences development and mixed use development. But we still included some recommendations that sort of recognize the importance of these other elements, and that really, when we think about land use, it is sort of very much aligned with and supportive of workforce and economic development as well. So next slide. So really, there's four kind of main buckets. I mean, the first bucket is again sort of where we put most of our recommendations, but we kind of recognize there's these other important pieces as well. And so I'll just sort of go through each one. So go to the next slide. So the first one, expand and create new development practices and standards to encourage the creation of intensive mixed-use life sciences districts. And so, one is sort of updating the zoning, easing restrictions for, a greater mix of uses in the life science center. Also thinking about zoning overlays throughout the county that might be incorporated in other existing commercial districts to allow for life sciences. So one is creating mixed use within this primary life science center, and then also creating opportunities in these other dense commercial districts to allow for more life sciences uses. Also encouraging higher densities in select commercial nodes. On the development side, identifying catalyst sites for development and redevelopment. I think this will be key to sort of, for the county to identify these specific sites. This is where future life sciences investment should go. Strengthening the process for developer selection through requests for proposals. So we know there is a process in place, but really, this recommendation is really focused on Montgomery County, Montgomery planning, and sort of their knowledge of land use and sort of incorporating more of this sort of land use lens, and also thinking about those requirements for developer selection, and they could assist with that. Again, strengthening of those connections in the real estate development community. Again, the life sciences development community is more niche. There's sort of this smaller set of developers, but really thinking about engagement with regional developers, but also national developers. And then, again, thinking about that alignment of land use as part of sort of regional or countywide economic development activities. So on this one, create value capture tools to encourage development and investments in the public realm. So as we've seen with all of the innovation district case studies, there is this key element of creating a place. So it's not just the real estate, but it's that public realm, everything around it. But how do you pay for that? And so there are various value capture tools, such as a business improvement district, that should be explored, but also looking at other use of incentives for development districts to whether that's sort of an incremental property tax approach, but ways to sort of generate revenues to then reinvest in the public realm. Next slide. So focusing place-based investments in around life sciences clusters. So this isn't just the life science center, but throughout the county. But it's that importance of that place management organization. So the innovation districts that we looked at, there was some type of organization or entity that did focus on the public realm. That organization also could support economic development efforts, could support innovation and entrepreneurship, but at its core, they were really sort of these place-based organizations. So with that, thinking about future investments in the public realm, whether that's open space, parks, trails, connectivity, thinking about life sciences as sort of a connector, or thinking about ways to connect the various life sciences nodes throughout the county are critical. And then this, final one, grow an entrepreneurial ecosystem. We know that there is, this strong commitment from, MCEDC and the county to sort of invest in this sort of startup infrastructure. But this is, again, sort of encouraging further development of those, and really thinking about investments in startups and that linkages and the linkage to land use and real estate, where startups want to be in these mixed use environments, where there's more possibilities for interaction and what the industry calls collisions, where you just have the innovators and the entrepreneurs that can sort of be in the same place together and bump into each other on the street. I think there are incubators and incubator programs throughout the county, but thinking about that step up space of I'm a startup, I'm not a fully developed company, I'm sort of in between. Where are those spaces? Where do I want to operate? And how can the county support development of that type of space so those types of businesses are retained in the county and not have to move elsewhere to find the space. So with that, it's a lot of content. Our report is over 100 pages long, so we tried to sort of hit the highlights, but it's still a lot of information. But yeah, happy to answer any questions you have.
Appreciate that. Okay, so obviously a lot of this is land use related. There'll be quite a bit of follow-up in the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee. Some of this is a entree, so to speak, into the Great Seneca Plan, which obviously will be taking up that committee. There's a number of broader economic development dynamics here. Has arguably one of, if not our most strategic growth industry in the county, and an area that the Economic Development Committee has been very focused and interested in. And so there'll be some follow-ups and dynamics there, but it'd be good to just dive in a little bit. And so I'll ask a few questions, open up to colleagues if they have questions. The first one is, a number of the recommendations here are things that we're doing. And so I just wanted to get a sense of what, if any, review or analysis was done on the things that we actually are doing in the county, and whether or not they're working, whether or not they could be enhanced and strengthened. just as an example, we had a zoning text amendment 2202 that I sponsored, that the council approved. It was specifically focused on making it easier to do land use in urban environments. Our zoning code had focused biohealth and life science uses in a very much of a suburban, office park, research park style development. We recognized that there were folks who wanted to do this, and it was specifically focused on trying to help and make it easier not only for urban areas, but also for spec development, exactly areas that have been focused on here. So, we also had another zoning text amendment that I sponsored, 2109, which makes it quicker to 75% reduction in the regulatory review. So I just we made changes to the SBIR program, our local incentive program, to focus more on earlier stage companies. That was done at the end of the last council, that the former I guess the predecessor to this joint committee, the Fed committee, Planning, Housing, Economic Development. So just could I get a sense from the consultant, is that something that you looked into or reviewed, or was that not part of the scope of what you were addressing as part of this effort in the 100 pages?
Question. So we did look into what's been done in the county to date. I think in some ways these reports where we're kind of developing recommendations for how to advance any kind of economic development initiative. Part of it's saying, yeah, keep doing that. That is a good kind of next step. I think in the case of zoning in particular, being sure to kind of continually keep reviewing those efforts and making sure that they kind of align with what is useful for the development community in particular is helpful. On the SBIR loan front, I think that any that's one step in helping small businesses, but part of it is that step up space, I think that Brian was alluding to, and creating opportunities to help small businesses along the way. There's a number of kinds of interventions and supplemental efforts that we're recommending.
And do you have a specific area, like you talked about, there's a lot of different types of space, and there's not one size fits all to what space means, but is there a particular recommendation of a lack of space? Like we had a crisis of wet lab space. We had nowhere near enough wet lab space for many years. My sense has been recently that we've essentially caught up to that by a number of efforts, but do you have a sense of that, of the space that you're talking about, and specifically what we could intentionally focus on?
Yeah, well, what we've seen, and this is a hard one. So it's not. I think that nationally the wet labs have kind of the county, we've seen in some other places that you've all caught up on that. So there's the kind of like initial, like there's a company that has 2 to 5 people. There's usually you can kind of make that work with like a small co-working space. But once that company gets to that like next awkward size, where they can't necessarily afford a 10 or 20 year lease, but that co-working atmosphere is no longer really working or appropriate either. Just like this kind of like in-between step-up space that Brian's referencing, that sometimes is supplemented with it's kind of a nicer version of a co-working space is the best way I can describe it right now. Like you need a longer term solution, but not something that, companies don't necessarily have the fundamentals to support that type of lease.
Got it. Turn it quickly to MCDC, Brad.
Thank you, Council President Friedson. For the record, Brad Stewart with Montgomery County Economic Development. So I think there's actually an economic sort of conundrum that falls into these not medium-sized spaces, but smaller companies. So you're large enough to graduate from an incubator like the GIC, but you move out and need a space that's 6,000 square feet, which currently there's not a lot of in the county, but many of the landlords are starting to repurpose space and cut it down to meet the demands of the market. The challenge is these companies are generally the worst possible credit risks for those landlords. Unfortunately, most of our life sciences companies will go 10 or 15 years with no revenue or relying upon venture capital or other funding. And so that puts landlords in a situation where they're developing space, but they have tenants who are probably they're not very good credit risk because their ability to pay that rent or that lease is dependent on their next ability to raise funds. So I think there's ultimately a financing challenge there, or a backstop for those landlords to be willing to invest that money and take them in as tenants.
Got it. All right. Well, that's interesting. Okay.
Council President,
Yes.
if I could speak
Planning,
to your
yep.
question about the ZTA, I believe that was ZTA 2202.
Yeah.
So we have had projects take advantage of that process, particularly in the White Flint sector plan area. And we look forward to other projects taking advantage of it. I think the difference between sort of the Great Seneca area that, this study provides a foundation and research toward is that area is primarily zoned LSC, so it's like that life sciences zone. That life sciences zone has limitations on residential. And so what we want to look at, and I'll just give you a short preview, but you'll see this coming in the summer, we want to look at how we can institute an overlay zone over the life sciences area so that we can incentivize a mix of uses. Because we've seen from this research and just simply from looking at other life sciences centers, is that we need to provide some more flexibility for like an infill development situation that can create more of a destination for the area and make it less of a pass-through. Because right now it's primarily single-use area, single-use in terms of office. It's fairly low density. And so we want to make sure that we can kind of sustain a more mix of uses that would be sustainable over time and grow that workforce and support that really strong workforce, which is over 9,000 jobs just in a small area of private life sciences, centered jobs. It's at around 64% of the entire county's life sciences jobs are really located in this area. So we want to make sure we're growing it over time and sort of making sure that there's a strong foundation to create some flexibility. So hopefully that
I was going to ask how
yeah.
you're going to use this for the Great Seneca Plan. You started to
Yeah.
talk a little bit
And we'll definitely
about
come
that.
to you with more detail
So-
on that.
So,
Yeah.
final question, then let me turn it over to my co-chair and then other colleagues. But there were 17 leases that were specifically identified here. It seemed like the kind of sweet spot was 50,000 square feet, give or take. That seemed to be the general area. Did we look at anything like kind of the ties that bind those places, how they differ from some of the other case studies that you looked at, what incentives they utilized or didn't utilize? I mean, to me, we have a relatively small, manageable group that would be instructed to understand what's working and what's not working, how we can build upon what we're doing. Like, is 50,000 right? Like, are we providing the sweet spot that is needed? Is 50,000 a reflection of something that's missing? Like, what can we learn from that list, and what level of analysis have we done or could we do to better understand what it's telling us about how we move forward and what we should be changing?
So yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the things that this report really did is to I don't like to actually deflect, because we should be looking more into those. I don't think this report got into the exact details of like what those 17 places needed or it took advantage of or didn't. But I think the key is this idea of the innovation district, which could be a bid or just some other structure, to really have boots on the ground, have people there, have an organization there that understands these needs. Because when you kind of do a countywide report in this sense, it's really hard to get into those details and get into those like individual firms and talk to each individual person. But that's kind of the purpose of having a place management organization, where they really know that when you see these are run really well, the people that run them have direct relationships with all of the business owners in that area. They know exactly what they need and what's working for them and what's not. So we kind of felt, in a sense, it'd be inappropriate, or we'd be a bit uncomfortable recommending specific policies to generate the exact type of square footage of lab space that we need right now, or to recommend something like let's start another incubator, because there's a lot of really technical details about how they should be, how something like that should be run. So I think where this is getting, especially from the planning department's perspective as more of like the land use department, we kind of wanted to touch on those more economic development types of things, but really center them around this idea of like having a layer of organizational capacity to enact them and to really make sure we're doing the right things.
Okay, I would just suggest, based on this report, if it's MCEDC more than planning, might be, but we have now a subset of leases to look at and do an analysis of what is that telling? What is the story that we can glean from that, and what recommendations, if any, exist? I mean, to me, on the land use side, I think there's probably some answers there, and on the incentives side, there's probably some answers there. And I think the report scratches at the surface, but I don't think it really tells us the answer to those questions that would really allow us to take it to the next level. And I think we need to go big and be bold here. I mean, what we're talking about of adding housing to the LSC, I'd likely be supportive of that, but that's not exactly big and bold. That is not a significant change. So I think we need to dig a little bit deeper and get a little bit more answers, and I think that's true on the land use side, and I think that's true on the incentive and economic development side. But with that, let me yield it to my co-chair.
Good morning. Thank you for that presentation. The reason why we're here today is also because, as everyone knows, the Economic Development Committee has been working on this office market report. And as I was talking to the planning department a little while ago, they told me about this report that they were doing with consultants, and we thought it was a great idea to have this presentation with ECON and PHP as these issues merge. So everything that we're talking about today will inform the presentation that we're going to have in March with the office market update report, and emphasizing especially those bold steps that we need to take, and completely agree with my co-chair, especially when it comes to incentives and things that we need to do as a county to ensure that when we talk about, we want to make sure that Montgomery County becomes the #1 place in the nation on life sciences, that we really walk the talk and invest on those companies so they can see Montgomery County as a home. So we're going to follow up on that. And I will say once again, last week we had the sports industry session with the Economic Development Committee, and it was Councilmember Evan Glass who mentioned that everything that we do with sports and then recs should also inform the office market report, because those are opportunities. It's not only life sciences, but things that we can do with rec, all those, I call them zombie buildings. Those buildings that are empty, that are waiting to be activated. So there's a lot of work to do, but also a lot of work that we as a county need to do, especially with our Economic Development Corporation, on creating those programs. One of the highlights that I saw, and definitely goes back to the Innovation District comments that were given by the consultant, and Mr. Stewart, you don't need to speak about it now. You can save it for next month. But really looking into all the grant programs that we're giving in Montgomery County, and things that we're not doing that we should be doing. When the consultant talked about the vertical mixed-use component, the first thing that came to my mind was the Discovery Building in Silver Spring. I have no idea what's happening into that building. I'm sure there's something going on, but our goal should be to ensure that that building gets occupied, and don't know how, but I'm hoping you're thinking about it. But it came to my mind. That's a perfect example. Urban area, the building is already there. So that's what's coming. That's what I have in my mind right now after hearing this conversation. If you have comments, please go ahead and share them. If you feel I need to wait until March, go ahead. Leave it up to you.
Well, thank you, Council Chair Fani-González. So I think that those are all great points. I'm making a list of things to get back to you, and I'll take a step back to how Ben started the meeting. And I'm very thankful for planning and eConsult for asking economic development to be part of this. Additionally, as they pointed out, it was not just a planning study. It was to look at how workforce needs to be looked at, how the economic development part of it needs to be looked at. But I think, as Ben said, this was a starting point, and a lot of what they'll use for their thinking about recommendations for the Greater Seneca Life Sciences Corridor. For me, I welcome Council President Friedson's, I won't say suggestion, request, because I think this really is an opportunity for you to give us feedback about what next steps should be for you to drill down beyond this. So I've got my notes here. I will respond to all of those to you. As far as the Discovery Building, absolutely. I think Silver Spring has got a lot of potential and needs a lot of love and attention. I also think that one of the challenges with life sciences buildings, which is reported in detail in this study, is it's very hard to take an existing building and convert it into life sciences. Most buildings are just not designed to withstand that type of load. They don't have floor plates that work. They can't handle the ventilation requirements. It's unfortunately the same challenge with trying to convert a lot of these large buildings to housing. They just were.
And the numbers in the report reflect that. You know, the difference between $300 and $900 per square foot, $1,000 to $2,000 per square foot. You know, there's just an inherent difference between those two types of buildings.
Yeah, and I think if you look at what local companies like United Therapeutics have done, the investment they've made in Silver Spring is incredible. That is truly an urban campus built right into the city. But a lot of that is, not all of it, but certainly a lot of it has come from taking down existing buildings and building brand new buildings in their place. So those are certainly possibilities, but they're also usually very, very expensive possibilities.
Yeah, actually a lot of United Therapeutics, just to clarify, is taking down existing parking facilities, public parking facilities, and repurposing them into hugely productive and actually net zero buildings. So I think it speaks to what is in the report, which talks about the private sector being the driver, but public participation and public support. And United Therapeutics is a perfect example of that. My understanding is Inventa Towers, the Discovery Building, they're looking at different uses that isn't just commercial office, that are other broader public priorities, which I think would be positive personally. But we'll see what happens with that. Let me turn it over to Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this is a really good joint committee, and look forward to further joint committees to dive deeper into this, as has been noted. I have just an observation, comment, and then question. One, I'm not sure I heard it during today's conversation thus far, but just last week, the $300 million announcement by AstraZeneca, huge, right? So showing that progress is being made, the vision is being supported, and investment is there. And so let's continue doing what we're doing, although we can't rest on our laurels. No one and no community can do that, so we need to continue innovating and looking ahead. And a few months ago, last fall, I had the opportunity to go to Daejeon, South Korea, which is considered Asia's Silicon Valley. Sister city of Montgomery County. And for the very short 3 days that I was there for the conference, they provided us with a tour of the community. And what we saw was an older, developed city, which basically came together post-Korean War. So nothing... old being a relative term, but the older part of the city mixed with this newer technology hub and space and buildings. And as we look at this corridor here in Montgomery County, I know a few people will look and say, how can we make that happen? But it happens across the world, and we can make it happen, and we can coexist, and it's what we need to do. And so look forward to working with all of you on that note. And then the one question I just had for Mr. Stewart, you talked about the credit risk, and that conundrum makes sense. But it is clearly an industry conundrum. So how do the other jurisdictions and commercial real estate owners, how do they manage it in other parts of the country?
So many places have much more aggressive investment funds that are local and regional in nature. So we have TEDCO here in the state of Maryland, but it's a statewide fund that's distributed across all industries. So a lot of times there's local investment that helps to provide funding for those companies, that provides a backstop to those landlords knowing there's money in the bank account. Sometimes in places you have companies that are growing much faster or become publicly listed sooner, so they're less of a credit risk. I think in this circumstance, as I think through it, we have a lot of companies that graduate from the incubator and probably are still Series A venture capital, which is fairly early, but well past seed stage capital, that probably have 2 or 3 years worth of operating cash on hand to meet their next milestone in drug development. I think that's really an opportunity for the county to think about how they might just provide some backstop as a credit risk to those companies, not necessarily financing. And the reason for that is it then gives the developers an incentive to create space for them for these types of companies, not a company. And the other thing it does, it makes it easier for those companies to be able to move into that space because the landlord's not concerned necessarily about losing money over time. What we found during the pandemic especially is that there's a fairly predictable formula that most developers around the country have come to, and that's their ideal world would be you'd build a space that's 6,000 to 8,000 square feet. Half of it would be office space, half of it would be lab space. So you've sort of managed your cost by building a little bit more office space. And they build it almost as stock. And they can turn it over. Very little of it's custom. I'm not suggesting we give people money to invest in custom development of space. But the ideal is if something happens to that tenant, it can be turned over to a new tenant within a month or 2 months. It's not something that just sits there because it's completely unique. So I think the formula exists. It's just how to sort of get the pipeline of companies moving through that so they can continue to grow.
And so a bridge financing of another name?
I don't even know that I would call it bridge financing. I would just call it a backstop. I mean, at the end of the day, if the company can continue to pay their bills, raise money, meet their clinical milestones, it just provides confidence to the developer to have signed that lease for 5 years. In the event that they do that and are successful, there's no risk. It's not necessarily a bridge financing. If the company is not able to raise money and let's say closes down and after 3 years that lease, it provides some risk reduction to the developer for having agreed to lease the space to them.
Interesting. I saw a number of my colleagues taking notes, so it's something that we can look into. Most definitely. I see our consultants nodding. Are there any other examples that you're aware of? Either of you? Or you're nodding in agreement with the concept? Okay.
Nodding in agreement.
Okay, there you go. Very good. Appreciate that. We'll definitely dive deeper, and I yield back. Thank you.
Appreciate the line of question and response. It's not dissimilar to a lot of economic and financial institutions. I used to serve on the Maryland Small Business Development Financing Authority, which provides small business loans to mostly women-owned, minority-owned small businesses that lack adequate access to private capital. And one of the financial instruments, not exclusively, but one of them is bond guarantees and loan guarantees. And so you have to be able to back it up, but you don't necessarily have to outlay the capital unless it defaults.
Conceptually,
So
exactly right on.
Same concept. So the model exists. It's slightly cutting edge, but certainly not bleeding edge, to say the least. Appreciate that. Let me turn it to Councilmember Balcombe.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation and look forward to hearing more about Great Seneca. So I've been working on the Great Seneca plan for 10 years or so, and it's exciting to see it move forward. So a couple things. I'm very excited about additional housing. That certainly makes sense there, and infill use makes sense. I feel like that area was one of the last campus-style area places, and we just missed it in terms of if we'd waited a couple of years, it would have been developed differently. So I think that makes sense. So just a couple things. Retail, And I understand. I mean, retail is just so difficult, especially it's always been difficult, but now it has its additional challenges. And looking at vertical mixed use, having the retail on the bottom just hasn't worked. I mean, are we looking at that in the new plan, or if we look at the research, is it just that we don't have the right mix of jobs and residential to support the retail? Any thoughts on that?
Okay. Well, so the vertical mixed use, I think, is more of just an example in there. Like, I don't think it's just kind of like a case study narrative type of thing that we could be looking at. I don't think that we don't have anything that we're working on in the plan that's specifically like, going for that. I think it was just one of about 6 different typologies that you could have. And I think there's a few that probably apply more to Montgomery County and the transition that we would make.
Okay.
And I would just I would just add to that, which is, you're exactly right. It is a challenge, Councilmember Balcombe. We have proposals that come to us with some retail in this area, but I would say majority it's that research and development or life sciences use. I think we want to keep the door open so that in the future, if the retail market changes, we don't need to go and update the zoning. The zoning is already providing some flexibility, and so that's really our goal. I do think that the overlay zone that you'll see in a few months, and I very much appreciate all the council members' feedback sort of as we go through the study, which informs that plan. So the plan is not before you today, just so you're aware. The plan will be coming to you later this spring, and this is very informative to that plan. But you'll see when we come to you that we'll want to create incentives for housing, because we know that housing, and particularly housing that's more affordable, is really limited in this area, and also the potential for it is limited because some of the zones, life sciences zone in particular, limits that use. And so we'll be looking at some ways for an overlay zone that kind of incentivizes that and creates opportunities for people to create more housing. It will also allow for retail, but it's not going to put any kind of strict requirements. We've learned out over time that it's more about flexibility and it's less about requiring certain uses.
Thank you.
And I think to that last point, what we have seen in the vertical, mixed use or the vertical type of development is the type of retail that goes in is really critical. Mm-hmm. I think from the planning staff, we'd love to see something that's very street activating, but that's not always, I think, the right mix, especially when you're looking at things that might be restaurant oriented or might be that might conflict, I think, with some of the, let's just say, ventilation and HVAC for the lab spaces that are there. So I do believe there's some conflicts depending on the type of retail that goes in. But to Ms. Sanders' point, I think the flexibility that is being offered is really what we're looking at.
Okay, thank you. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about the comparisons to other areas. Whenever we have these comparisons, the issue of not having an academic research institution always comes up, right? And I just want to dig a little deeper on that. University of Maryland is not that far away. We have universities at Shady Grove, and I know that that's not the same, but we have, in this area, for instance, we have both NIST and National Cancer Institute, and countywide with FDA and NIH. And other research areas don't have what we have. And so what is the balance? Why do we keep falling back on this obstacle of the Research Institute?
I can speak to that, but I think Marin Hill could also, as the project lead for the plan, speak a little bit to it as well. 5 of the 7 examples listed had an organizational entity, a placemaking entity or a marketing entity. So I think we've actually, through this research and through talking with stakeholders, we've also visited we've visited the National Landing in Northern Virginia to kind of learn about their marketing efforts for that innovation district. And I think it's really about the communication and the marketing that maybe we're having some challenges here. because we have excellent employers, we have excellent universities nearby, we have great transportation infrastructure. As the consultant noted, we have the infrastructure in terms of, even our sewer system, all these different things are in place. But how do we get the word out better? How do we help people understand that we are actually a national leader in this? And so I think that's kind of what we would really like to see is this organizational entity. The planning department, will be likely recommending something to this effect, but we won't get into the details of what exactly that is. We feel that the private sector needs to be at the table in that discussion. So we will put that as a very strong need and goal, but we would like to see the private sector be involved in sort of what that looks like and working with the government to kind of come up with the bones of that. And that will likely be a follow-up item to the plan because we understand that it can take many different forms and we don't want to necessarily dictate what that is. So hopefully that addresses your question. I don't know, Martin, if you had anything to add. Okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. Appreciate the work. You added a question to me with this last question from Councilmember Balcombe. It's always good when teams work together here and build. I've been here long enough to remember MCDC's marketing plan in life sciences was right at the front. I worry a little. I want to hear from them, and Bill has been here too, and you have been here as well. That last recommendation, that is, I guess, will be coming. You previewed from planning. I feel like we've done that, so, and that we're doing it. So I would want to know how that's different than. It's not, that's obviously not MCDC's only role. Right, but I do think because we are a leader in life sciences, and we have done well, I think all of us have wanted to lean in on that. So I would want to know, maybe I'm not understanding the type of entity, or if it's something different, and what the activities would be. So it's kind of a question for anyone who's can answer that.
Thank you for the question, Marin Hill with Montgomery Planning. The recommendation that Ms. Sanders is referring to is really coming out of the Great Seneca Plan, which, if you remember from this presentation, is the area that kind of has the largest group of life science employers in the county. Yeah. So I think that, and I don't want to speak for MCEDC, but when we've looked at marketing in the past, it's been probably countywide, and how do we put life sciences forward as countywide. And what is unique about this recommendation is that we're saying there actually needs to be kind of a place management organization that is anchored in a geographical location where we are seeing that growth, where we have as a county invested in over the past 50 years, starting in the 70s and 80s as ceding land to the universities at Shady Grove, to Adventist Healthcare. And then in this location, having that coordination between the existing entities that are there, but also, as Councilmember Balcombe said, connecting them with our institutions that are actually very close by, and bringing them in to connect them with the AstraZenecas, with the smaller organizations that are in this place, physically, but might not have the connections both within the Life Sciences Center or close by. As the consultants mentioned, when we look at Research Triangle Park, the educational institutions that anchor the life sciences there are actually 15 miles away, which, if you think about 15 miles from that Rockville-Gaithersburg area, there are a lot of places that we can capture. So I think that that might be one of the differences, is that looking at as we have this strong growing cluster where it has been growing and concentrated, and we have that ability to have the what do they say, bumping into one another as we're innovating. So I think that that's the difference probably between past MCEDC countywide marketing recommendations versus a place-based one.
Do you have any comments on that? I mean, because that to me sounds like, okay, we want to focus on a specific area, which an organization to focus on a specific area where there's a lot going on and great. And I've seen some of these presentations in the past, which certainly focuses on that area because it's our #1 area. So I just, and I know we're not discussing it today. I just want to have you think about that, because I don't, when I hear new entity, I get worried because I feel like we have a lot of entities, and when we talk about marketing and letting people know what we're doing, I get really concerned about that, because I feel like we've done that. I feel like we have some institutional capacity around that. This is an area that we've marketed big time. Like if you had on the presentation, this area is going to be #1, you know, so is it a program within something we're already doing? I just want to push us to think about it a little more, but go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Jawando. I'll try to answer some questions Councilmember Balcombe enticed you to ask also, so
Sure.
To try and respond to your teamwork. So I think you're exactly right. There has been a lot of effort to market Montgomery County, to market the Greater Seneca Life Sciences Corridor, to market the success that we have here in the state of Maryland. Personally, I'm not saying this on behalf of MCDC, it's been very poorly coordinated as a state. I think we collectively face the challenge and opportunity for people to realize that Maryland is a designation for life sciences in the world. And I give these presentations all over the world. I can tell you two things for sure. 99% of people in the world don't know what a county is. And so when I say we're from Montgomery County, they don't even know what that unit of government is.
Sure,
it's incoherent to them. And two, many of them don't know where Maryland is on the planet Earth. And so I think sometimes we get caught in the bubble of we live here and believe that everyone else sees the world the same way we do. So I think there is an opportunity for us to continue to do better at that, and try and get the state and the county and the cities, everyone aligned on how do we market this place as a place to be for life sciences, which it is and should be increasingly better known for that over time. So that's one, whether that's organization, whether that's cohesiveness, whether it's each of you twisting everybody's arms that you know that sort of is swimming in different directions, it should happen.
Just needs
it
to
needs
happen. Yeah.
Absolutely. The pieces are there. They need to be more coherently pulled together and rowing in the same direction. To answer Councilmember Balcombe's point, and I think a couple of things. A lot of this happens now. It's a matter of pulling together that communications in a coherent way. So if you look at a company like REGENXBIO, most of their technology comes from the University of Pennsylvania, right? I mean, they're companies that are here are partnering with people around the world, whether they're local research institutions, whether it's Hopkins or University of Maryland College Park, whether it's the NIH, or global institutions, right? So I think it's a matter of putting together that coherent story and getting it out there. A lot of what I do at MCDC is really business development, right? It's that literal transactional.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk to you because you want to build a facility here, but our marketing team does that higher level of let us help you understand why you want to talk to me. So I think there's an opportunity for that. To Councilmember Balcombe's point earlier, I think the Greater Seneca Life Sciences Corridor occurred at the exact right time. I've spent a lot of time on campuses that were literally ringed in by a fence, and you went through a security gate to 20, 30 buildings that were there. The Life Sciences Center is not that. But it does have opportunities to improve. If you look at the corner where Great Seneca and Darnestown Road come together, there's about $2 billion worth of investment on that corner right now from Horizon Pharmaceuticals, Millipore Sigma, and now AstraZeneca. So the opportunity is each of these were built as a lot with a parking lot and a building. And how do we integrate this neighborhood into an actual neighborhood, right? Even if I work at AZ now, am I going to walk across those intersections to go to Trader Joe's to get lunch? If I'm REGENXBIO, can I go to Shady Grove and get lunch and get back within an hour? So I think these are things that planning's talking about, is how do we take what's there and start to smooth the edges of them and figure out how we better integrate the people that want to be part of this community. How do we actually sort of remove the barriers and cause that to happen?
I appreciate that, and I should have led with that. I think all that sounds great. That area is not very walkable, and all the things we need to do there in housing all sounds great. Just last thing I'll say real quickly, return on investment, to your point. If we can integrate as we move forward some analysis, I think Council President talked about a version of this, of looking at what we already done, of what this has yielded for us economically, socially, the good that's come out of some of the, I think package that to the point of communicating the story of what has been the return on investment, what we have, and what's possible going forward. I think that's a story that we could tell a little better too, and quantify in some respects. So just wanted to mention that as a point.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We're about to hit the witching hour. I will just note a couple things. One, we also have biohealth innovation we have invested in, which, their function is similar to what we're talking about here in partnership with MCEDC. So, to the point that's been made, there are efforts. I think, like in almost everything we do, we're good at programs. We're not so good at systems building in Montgomery County. We're good at building buildings, but less strong at clusters and communities. And I think that's really around life sciences where we need to build on that. We have a ton of assets in Great Seneca and beyond, because we also have some real strengths. You mentioned United Therapeutics and others. There's been huge efforts in the North Bethesda area, in the White Flint Plan area. Both White Flint Plan areas, I will say this council invested $40 million over 5 years in health computing in partnership with University of Maryland and University of Maryland, Baltimore, and University of Maryland Medical System. So we're doing a ton. But the question is everybody firing, together on the same cylinder? And I think as we do this, I just don't want to lose sight of that either. And I think that's what you're hearing from colleagues as well. We don't want a Great Seneca plan that is creating a wall around Great Seneca. We want the Great Seneca plan to double down on the concentration of one of our most concentrated and best strengths in life sciences and biohealth, but do it in a way that is part of the broader ecosystem in the county that ties in FDA and NIH and United Therapeutics in Silver Spring, and the work that we're doing with the Health Computing Institute and everything that's happening in North Bethesda. So that's the charge. That's the challenge. And I'll just note as well, you heard a lot about what the Economic Development Committee is doing related to office vacancy, which is really important. Some of that has to do with incentives and the economic development side of things. A lot of it has to do with land use decisions as well, with planning, housing, and parks. The good thing is the chair serves on the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee. But I do think we have to get out of the thought process of exclusively thinking about offices conversion, because you heard from Mr. Stewart some of the challenges with that. We saw from the numbers why that's cost prohibitive and probably highly unlikely in most cases, but not all cases. But repurposing is what we really ought to be thinking about. Sometimes that means rezoning, as we're talking about in Great Seneca, and as you heard from the consultants, and sometimes that means not necessarily rezoning, but allowing for an easier process to change a use from one type of commodity office essentially to housing or to lab or to some other more productive, more lucrative use, that if we made it easier to do that and faster to do it, it might happen in a quicker way. It wouldn't require us to incentivize it financially, but might be from a regulatory perspective. So with that, appreciate the conversation, appreciate the consultants for joining us, appreciate the work of MCEDC and planning and council staff. And we are adjourned, and I will turn it back to the Economic Development Committee, and I believe there's also other committees today as well. We have a Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee later, and I believe a Transportation and Environment Committee this afternoon. So with that, this joint committee session is now adjourned.